Somebody annoyed you this week. Not a little, properly annoyed you. They took credit for something, they cut you off, they said the thing they always say in that voice they always say it in, and here's what you did about it. Nothing. You didn't hit them, you didn't take anything from them, you didn't wait outside their building. You went home, you found someone you trust, and you told them the story. You made your case. You watched their face to see if they agreed with you. That's it. That's the whole thing you did. It feels small. It feels petty, even. Talking about someone behind their back is the kind of thing you'd deny doing if anyone asked. But that ugly little instinct you had this week, that urge to go and tell someone, that's not a personality flaw. That's a weapon system. And it's older than anything you'd call a weapon. Because for almost the entire history of our species, there were no police. There were no courts, no prisons, no judges, no written rules, nobody to call. If a man in your group decided he wanted your food, your shelter, or your partner, and he was bigger than you, there was no authority above him. None. Not one. And yet, people mostly didn't kill each other. Something was holding the line. Something invisible, with no building and no uniform and no name. And you used it this week. So keep the question in your head, because it's the whole video. With no laws and no punishment, who actually stopped the killers? Now go somewhere cold. You're inside a hill, and the hill is inside you. Limestone presses against both shoulders. The air is wet and still, and it tastes like a coin held under your tongue. Your breathing sounds wrong in here. Too loud, then swallowed. There's no light, not dim light, none. Your eyes are open and working and giving you absolutely nothing, and your hands have taken over the job, reading the wall in front of you like a face. The floor is slick, not muddy, slick, like something's been polished by dripping for longer than your species has existed. Your feet find the edge of a hole before your brain does. It goes down. You can tell by the sound your breath makes when you lean over it, the way it drops away and doesn't come back. Cold air rises out of it against your chin. And you are not down here empty-handed. You're dragging something heavy, wrapped in your arms, and it's cooling.
Here's what will kill you inside a day if you stay in this place. It isn't the dark, it isn't starvation. It's the animal that also thinks this cave is a good idea, comes home at dusk, and weighs more than a horse, and this passage is too narrow for both of you. So nobody lives down here. Nobody sleeps here. There is no reason on earth for a person to be this deep inside a mountain with a body in their arms. Which means every single person who came down here came down on purpose. Try to picture the effort. You've struggled to get a mattress up a staircase. Now do it in total darkness, on a slope, through a gap you have to turn sideways for, holding a person. And they kept coming. Someone carried a dead man up a mountain, in the dark, through a crawl space, and dropped him into a shaft deeper than a house is tall. Then they climbed back out. And then, years later, someone did it again, and again. And again, until the bottom of that shaft became a heap of people. Nobody was buried, nobody was farming, nobody was writing. These were not people like you. Their hands were like yours, though. Same knuckles, same aching wrists after a long day, same instinct to carry the person you lost somewhere that felt like it mattered. Whatever this was, it wasn't convenient. Nothing about it was convenient. People do inconvenient things for exactly two reasons: fear or love. Usually both at once. There's a cave under a hill in northern Spain. It's called the Pit of Bones, and it earned the name. 400,000 years old. Sit with that for a second. Not 4,000, 400,000. Everything you'd recognize as history, every empire, every war you learned in school, every pyramid, happened in the last 1% of the gap between you and the man at the bottom of that shaft. If you want to keep going, subscribe, because the next place we're standing shouldn't have had any survivors at all, and it did. There's one more thing down there, and it isn't a person. A hand axe. Shaped stone, worked on both faces, made from a red rock that catches light in a way none of the ordinary tools do. And the edge is clean. Nobody ever cut anything with it. Nobody wore it out on a carcass or blunted it on a bone. Somebody spent hours making a beautiful thing and then dropped it into a hole in the ground with the dead, on purpose, and walked home with nothing. So these people cared. Hold on to that, because you're about to need it.
Now, here's the part that doesn't make sense. They pulled a skull out of that pit with 2 holes in the front of it, right above the eye. 2. Not a crack from a fall down the shaft. A fall leaves a mess, and this isn't a mess. These are clean. and they're the same shape as each other, made by the same edge, swung by the same arm at almost the same angle, which tells you something horrible and very specific. The first one didn't work. Somebody stood over another person, hit them in the face hard enough to break through bone, watched what happened next, and then decided to do it one more time. That is not a hunting accident. That is not a fall. That is a decision made twice by someone who was looking at a face while they made it. That's the oldest murder anyone can point to. And now the thing that should be bothering you. The man who was killed didn't get left where he dropped. He didn't get dragged off by animals in a ditch. He got carried up a hill and lowered into the same pit as everybody else, alongside people who were almost certainly his family, by people who almost certainly knew exactly what had happened to him and exactly who had done it. So the group kept the killer's victim. They spent a day of hard, dangerous, pointless labor on a man who had been beaten to death by one of their own, which means the group kept the killer. There was no jail on that mountain. There was nowhere to send him. Nobody had invented the idea of sending someone anywhere. Everyone in that group woke up the next morning and the morning after that and stood next to him at the same fire and handed him food. So what happened to him? Go east and go warmer. Your feet are in sand and the sand is moving, not blowing, sliding, because the ground here is half riverbank and it wants to be in the water. The heat comes up through your soles first. It gets into your shins before it gets into your face. Your mouth is dry in a specific way, not thirsty dry, sticky. Your tongue keeps finding the back of your teeth, and grit is already there. Reeds, higher than you, on both sides. They move when there's no wind. You stop moving too. Because here's the thing about a green river running through a place that is turning into desert. Everything comes to it. The animals you want to eat come to it. The animals that want to eat you come to it. And so does everybody else.
That's what kills you here, inside a day. Not the sun, not the crocodiles, though they're in there, doing that patient thing crocodiles do. It's that the water is shrinking every year, and every family for 100 miles is being squeezed toward the same shrinking line of green. And there is not enough of it. You are standing in a corridor. So is everyone else. So people did the thing people do. They waited in the reeds for other people. They shot into groups from a distance and closed in afterwards. They killed children, which is the detail that stops you cold. Because killing children isn't rage. Killing children is strategy. It's how you make sure a family doesn't come back next season. And they did it at the water's edge because they knew where you'd be. Everyone has to drink. Ambush works because thirst has no imagination. And then they did something nobody had bothered to do before. They dug a graveyard. Not a pit, not a shaft, a proper one, in one chosen place, used over and over, in ground people came back to on purpose. Which is a strange thing to build during a war, until you realize a graveyard is also a flag. This is ours. Our people are in this dirt. Come here and find out what that means. There's a stretch of high ground above the Nile in northern Sudan. 13,000 years ago, somebody filled it with the dead. More than half of them have stone points in them. In the ribs, in the spine, in the skull. Some are still lodged in the bone, which means nobody pulled them out, which means nobody was in a state to. And this is where it gets strange. Look at the healed wounds. Because a lot of these bodies have both. Old damage that knitted back together. Bone that grew a lumpy scar over itself. Months of somebody limping and getting better. And then fresh damage that never healed at all. That's not a massacre. A massacre happens once. That's people getting attacked, surviving, patching each other up, staying anyway, and getting attacked again. Some of them lived through it 2 or 3 times. They knew what was coming. They knew where it would come from. And they stayed on that riverbank because the alternative was the desert, and the desert doesn't negotiate. So that's what happens when there's no rule and no referee and no way out. Now, hold that image because we're about to go somewhere that looks peaceful, and it's the most frightening place in this video. Cold now. Properly cold. The wet kind that gets in under your clothes and sits there. Pine on one side, gray water on the other. Small waves, no rhythm to them. Your fingers have gone stiff and stupid, and you're clumsy with them, dropping things, getting annoyed at yourself. You can smell smoke, and you can smell people, and both smells are coming from the same direction, which is the direction you want to be walking in. Because it's evening, and this is Northern Europe, and the water behind you is a few degrees off killing you. That's the whole threat here. There's no war, there's no famine. just cold and dark, and the plain fact that a human being alone on this shore does not last the night. You need the fire, you need the boat, you need the other people, and there are only about 30 of them, and every single one knows your face. Now think about what that actually means. You can't hunt the big animals alone. You can't crew a boat alone. You can't hold a net alone, or keep a fire in wet weather alone, or be ill for a week alone. Every single thing that keeps you breathing requires somebody else to want you there. This is where humans got good at burying each other. They put their dead in the sand in rows. They painted them with red earth, handfuls of it, pressed into skin and hair, so much that it's still staining the ground now. They tucked tools in beside them, antlers, blades, things that were expensive to make and useful to keep, given away into a hole because it mattered that this person go into the ground properly. They did it for dogs, too. There's a dog down there buried with red ochre, a set of antlers laid across it, and a stone blade. A working dog, given a send-off with more care in it than most people alive today will get. 2 graveyards on the sand at Skattaholm, on the southern coast of Sweden, 7,000 years ago. And then there are the others. Because in among the ochre and the antlers, some people got nothing. No red earth, no blades. Shoved in at an odd angle, face down, off to the side, or pulled apart and scattered where the rest of the row is neat. Same beach, same families, same short walk with a body in their arms. Somebody made a decision at that graveside. Somebody said, not him, not the earth, not the antler, not the words, not whatever it was they said over the others. He goes in the sand like a bad smell, and we all watch it happen, and we all remember it. Nobody hit him. Nobody had to. And here's what that does to the living, which is the actual point of it. Every child on that beach saw where he went. Every one of them learned, without a single rule being spoken out loud, exactly what a person has to do to end up face down in the wrong part of the sand. You don't need a courtroom if you've got a funeral. And that's the part that should be crawling up your back right now, because that punishment doesn't require a jail or a judge or a single person willing to be the one who did it. It only requires that everybody agrees. So think about who agreed. Think about how they agreed, on a beach, in the dark, with no words written down anywhere. Somebody had to be talking. Warm air, and it's got weight to it. It sits on your chest like a hand. You're under a lip of rock, high enough that the river sounds far away and thin. Behind you, the stone is still holding the day's heat, and you can feel it on your back. In front of you, the dark starts about an arm's length out and then doesn't stop. Insects, constantly. On your ankles, in your ears, in the corner of your eye. You stopped swatting hours ago, the way you eventually stop swatting. Somebody near you is asleep. You can hear the change in their breathing when they go under. And that's what you're actually listening to. Not the dark, not the river. Him. Because there's a man in this group who takes what he wants. He takes the good meat first. He takes the warm spot. Last winter, he took a woman who did not want to go with him. And her brother said something about it, and now her brother's face doesn't work properly on one side. He's bigger than you. He's bigger than anyone, and there is no one to tell. That's what kills you here in the next 12 hours, if it decides to. Not a leopard. A man you've known your whole life, who is stronger than you, who has worked out that nothing happens to him. He's the reason our species should have ended up like every other big primate. A boss at the top, everyone underneath taking it forever. That's not what happened. And this overhang is part of why. Because up here, in the dirt, there are little bone points. Not spearheads. You couldn't kill anything decent by shoving one of these into it. They're the length of your finger, thinner than a pencil, and one of them still has old glue and plant residue clinging to the base where somebody set it into a shaft. They're arrow tips. A rock shelter above a river in South Africa. 60,000 years ago. Bone points, hafted, tiny. Now stop and think about what a small, sharp thing that flies actually does to a group of people. A spear is a strength weapon. You have to get close, you have to be able to take him if it goes wrong, and if you're smaller than him, it goes wrong. An arrow doesn't care how big you are. An arrow is the difference between I could never fight him and I could end him from behind a bush and he'd never know which of us it was. Put a bow in every hand in the camp, and the strongest man in the world wakes up every morning as the most killable person there. Same principle as everyone in a room having a phone camera. Nobody has to be brave anymore. They just have to be present. So here's the reversal, and it's the whole video turning over. You've been picturing this backwards. You've been picturing the strong keeping the weak in line and the weak having no way to stop killers. It's the opposite. For most of our history, the weak kept the strong in line. And the person in real danger wasn't the quiet one. It was the man who thought he was untouchable, because everyone else could count and he was 1 and they were 30. But 30 people don't move at the same time by accident. 30 people need to already agree, in advance, quietly, before anything happens. They need to know who's in and who's wavering. They need to have tested it. So how do 30 people arrive at a decision with no meeting, no vote, no leader, and nothing written down? They talk about him. That's it. That's the mechanism. Not a court. 100 small conversations at the edge of a fire, over months, each one a little braver than the last. Someone mentions the meat. Someone else mentions the girl's brother. Somebody says the thing everyone's thinking and nobody dies for saying it, and the temperature in the group shifts by 1 degree. The thing you did this week, the ugly little thing you deny doing, is the oldest justice system on Earth. It's how 30 frightened people find out they're actually one big, angry thing. And it doesn't start with killing. It starts with mockery, and mockery is doing real work. In groups that still live this way, a man who drags in a huge animal gets no praise at all. He gets abuse. People stand around the carcass and complain about how thin it is, how they've walked all this way for a bag of bones, how they'll be embarrassed to eat it. He's supposed to agree with them. He's supposed to say it's a scrawny, useless thing, and he's sorry for wasting their time. That looks like rudeness. It isn't. It's maintenance. It's the group reaching up and pressing down on a man's head the moment it starts rising, gently, while pressing gently still works. Because the alternative is letting him grow into someone who takes the warm spot, and by then, gentle is finished. The joke is the first warning. The silence around a fire is the second. And when it finished, it usually finished the same way. Not a mob, not a fight. In the groups we've watched do this in living memory, the job goes to one of his own relatives, his brother, his cousin, somebody with his blood on their hands in both senses, chosen on purpose. Because if a stranger does it, the family has to answer, and then you've got a feud that outlives everybody. If his own brother does it, there's nobody left to avenge him. Read that again. The killer's family didn't protect him. They were handed the job of ending him because they were the only ones who could do it without starting the next war. That's the answer to what happened to the man at the bottom of the shaft in Spain. Nobody exiled him. Nobody jailed him. He got talked about for a long time by people who smiled at him the whole while. And then one morning, somebody he trusted was standing behind him. So the system worked. It worked for hundreds of thousands of years without a single written word. Now ask what it costs to live inside it. Because if the group can do that to him, quietly, patiently, by agreement, then the group can do it to anyone. And every person in that camp knows it. There's no appeal. There's no evidence. There's no one checking whether the story that went around the fire for 8 months was even true, including you. Snow, but not deep. The wind has scraped most of it sideways and left the ground bare and hard in patches. And the bare patches are worse because they're ice. Your face is the only part of you exposed, and it has stopped reporting back. You touch your cheek with the back of your hand, and it feels like touching furniture. You're on a slope, above the trees, below the ridge, in that middle band where there's nothing to hide behind and nowhere to sit down. Your pack is heavy in a way that's gone from annoying to structural. Copper axe. Bow, unfinished. Arrows, most of them not ready. A little birch container with an ember inside it, wrapped in leaves, still alive. You ate a few hours ago. Bread, meat, something green. Your stomach's fine. Everything about you says a man in the middle of an ordinary week. And you keep turning around. Here's what kills you on this mountain. Not the cold. You're dressed for it, better than most people reading this could manage. It's that you're above the tree line with a bow you haven't finished, and somewhere below you is a person who knows your name and has decided about you. You have a cut on your hand, deep one, between thumb and finger, a day or two old, the kind you get when a blade you're grabbing turns in your grip. You've already been in one fight this week. This is the second half of it. And you weren't the only one bleeding in it.
There's blood on your gear that isn't yours, on the coat, on the knife, on the arrows, more than one person's worth. 4, in fact. So whatever happened down in that valley, you were in the middle of it, and you gave as good as you got. And then you went up a mountain where nobody could come at you from 3 sides. It didn't help. The arrow comes from below and behind, from a distance, from someone who did not want to be close enough for you to see their face. It goes in under the shoulder blade and cuts the artery there, and after that, it's a matter of minutes, and there's nothing to be done about it on a mountain or anywhere else. Then the person came up the slope and stood over him, and this is the part that makes it personal. They didn't take the axe. That axe is copper. It is the single most valuable object anyone in that valley owns, the sort of thing you'd expect a body to be stripped for before it went cold. It's lying there in the snow with a dead man's hand near it, and the man who fired the arrow looked at it and walked away. That's not a robbery. Robbery leaves with things. That's someone finishing an argument. A pass in the Alps on the border between Italy and Austria. He went into the ice about 5,000 years ago, and the ice kept him. Skin, gut contents, tattoos, everything. Sit with what that means for a second. Not a skeleton. A man. With a stubble line and a stomach that still had his last meal in it, and a wound in his hand from grabbing at somebody, and 40-odd little marks tattooed into his joints where he hurt. And then think about where they buried the killer's problem, which is nowhere, because nobody came to get the body. Nobody came up that mountain to bring him home. Nobody rolled him into a pit with red earth in it. He lay in the open, on a slope, in front of everybody's mountains, and the snow did the rest. Compare that to the beach in Sweden. Same species, same instinct to put your people in the ground properly. And here it just doesn't happen, which either means his people didn't know where he'd fallen, or it means his people decided not to go and look. Now here's what's changed since the overhang in the dark. That old system, everyone talks, everyone agrees, one relative does the job, only works while everyone is inside the same conversation. 30 people, one fire, everybody's face known to everybody. But by the time this man is walking up his mountain, that world is finished. There are villages now. There are fields and fences and stored grain and a copper axe worth more than a year of anyone's work. There are neighbors you've never met, in valleys you don't go to, who own things you'd like. The group got bigger than the conversation, and the second that happens, the old machine stops turning. You can't shame a man you'll never see. You can't get 30 people to agree about a stranger. Gossip needs a fire and a small number of faces around it, and there just isn't one anymore. There's something else, too. You can't walk away from a field. A hunting camp can split when 2 men can't stand each other. Half go north, half go south, and the problem solves itself by distance. But nobody abandons a harvest they planted, or a granary they filled, or a herd they raised. The exit door closed. For the first time, people who hated each other had to stay. So what fills the gap? For a while, a long, ugly while, nothing does. And what you get instead is exactly what you'd predict. Wealth worth taking, strangers to take it from, grudges that nobody can settle by talking because the two of you don't share a single person in common who could carry the message. Villages burned, whole families found in ditches with the backs of their heads staved in, and one man on a mountain with an arrow in his back and his axe still lying beside him, because the person who shot him wasn't after his things, he was after him. So the question isn't who stopped the killers anymore. The question is what we built when the old thing broke. Because we did build something, and you have been using it your entire life, and you used it this week without noticing. Dust. And it's in everything. Your teeth, your eyelashes, the creases of your knuckles. Flat country, no hills to look at, so your eye keeps going to the only tall thing there is. And it's not a mountain, it's a building. People made that. People made it deliberately taller than anything a person needs. Heat coming off mud brick, the smell of a canal that isn't moving fast enough, and noise. That's the shock. Voices, layered, in more than one language from more than one direction. Somebody arguing about a price, a donkey, a child, thousands of people, not 30, thousands. You don't know their faces. You will never know their faces. Here's what kills you in this city. Nothing dramatic. It's that any one of these thousands can do something to you and then simply walk 4 streets away and become nobody. There's nobody to tell, not because there's no one to talk to, because there's no one for whom your story means anything. The fire is gone. The circle around it is gone. And in a room in one of these buildings, somebody is pressing marks into wet clay with a cut reed. And the marks are a list. That's it. That's the whole invention. A list. If a man does this, then this happens to him. Written down before anyone has done anything. Before there's a body, before there's a family screaming in the street. Fixed in advance by people who don't know either of you and have no stake in which of you wins. A city in southern Iraq, 4,000 years ago. Clay tablets, cracked, with the oldest surviving list of rules on them. And here's what's on it, which is not what you'd guess. Most of it isn't about killing at all. Most of it is prices. If you break a man's foot, you pay him this much silver. If you knock out a tooth, this much. If you accuse someone and can't prove it, you pay what he would have paid. The first law code in existence is largely a receipt book, which sounds like a letdown until you see what it's actually doing. Look at what it takes away. It takes the axe out of the brother's hand. For hundreds of thousands of years, if someone killed your family, the response was your family's job. And your response then became somebody else's job, and theirs became someone else's. And that's how a valley ends up with 2 families who can't remember what started it and can't stop. That's the thing the old system was built to prevent, and the thing it could only prevent while everybody knew everybody. The list breaks that chain. It says, this is no longer between you two. It's between him and the rule. You don't get to answer this. You get compensated instead, and then you stop. That's the real invention, not punishment. Punishment is ancient. We watched people do it on a beach in Sweden with nothing but a decision. The invention was taking revenge away from the people who most wanted it. And there's a line near the top of that clay, before the prices start, where the man who ordered it explains himself. He says he made it so that the orphan would not be handed over to the rich man, and the widow would not be handed over to the powerful man. He is almost certainly lying. Kings usually are. But look at what he thinks he has to lie about. He's not boasting that he's the strongest. He's claiming to be the shield for the people with nobody behind them. Which means 4,000 years ago, that was already the story a ruler had to tell to be allowed to rule. That's the promise. We've spent every year since arguing about whether it's been kept. And now, come back. Come back to the room you're in. Warm, probably, lit. There is a lock on your door that you don't think about and haven't checked. And behind that lock is the entire apparatus. The rules, the courts, the numbers you could call, 4,000 years of the list getting longer, none of which you used this week. When that person annoyed you, you didn't reach for any of it. You didn't consult a rule. You went and found someone you trust and you told them. And you watched their face, because their face was the verdict. That's not a small, ugly instinct. That's the original machine, still running, underneath the newer one. Because here's the thing the list never managed to replace. The law can take your money and take your freedom, but it cannot make people stop wanting you around, and it cannot make them want you back. Only the other system does that. And it still works exactly the way it worked at the edge of a fire. One conversation at a time until enough people agree. You know this. You've felt it. You've been in a room where you could tell that something had gone around about you before you got there. And every animal instinct you own started screaming, and you could not have explained why. That's 400,000 years old. That's older than fields, older than cities, older than a single written word. That's the man in the pit. Somebody talked about him until the talking was finished. And whatever he did, whoever he was, whatever the 2 blows were for, his people still carried him up a mountain in the dark and laid him with everyone else and left something beautiful in the hole with him. They killed him and they kept him, both. Because that's what a group is. We never invented the thing that stops killers. We invented courts and prisons and lists in clay, and none of them ever replaced it. We only ever built fences around the oldest tool we have, each other.